In the shadows of the Cold War, Italian cinema created a secret world, one dripping with danger, betrayal, and double crosses. These weren't just movies, they were coded messages wrapped in glamour and paranoia. Why have they been buried by history, eclipsed by James Bond? Tonight, we unearth 15 forgotten Italian spy thrillers that once whispered to a world trembling on the brink. 1. Agent 077, Mission Bloody Mary, 1965. When Mission Bloody Mary first hit screens, it was hailed as Italy's bold answer to James Bond. Directed by Sergio Grieco, the film starred Ken Clark as Agent 077, a suave, muscle-bound American spy whose mission was to retrieve a stolen nuclear weapon before it ignited global catastrophe. For audiences of 1965, this was adrenaline distilled into celluloid, complete with exotic locales and seductive femme fatales. But while its release brought strong ticket sales across Europe, it never achieved Bond's cultural immortality. Instead, it languished in the shadow of Goldfinger and Thunderball. The film's production was ambitious, with an international crew and frantic location shoots spanning Paris, London, and Madrid. Yet this ambition also bred chaos. Rumors swirled that Grieco battled financiers daily, while Clark reportedly performed his own stunts, sometimes at reckless risk. Critics were divided. Some praised its brisk pacing and glossy sheen, while others dismissed it as a derivative knockoff. The truth lay somewhere in between. Mission Bloody Mary captured the Cold War's paranoia in distinctly Italian fashion, less about gadgets and wit, more about raw brawn, betrayal, and sensual tension. Today, it is forgotten outside Eurospy fan circles, a victim of cinematic amnesia. Still, watching it now, you feel the pulse of a continent on edge. It is a film where every smile masks a lie, and every kiss conceals a dagger. Its obscurity only heightens its mystique, proof that history sometimes buries the very films that defined their anxious era. 2. Black Box Affair, 1966. At first glance, Black Box Affair seemed like just another Eurospy thriller. But this Italian-Spanish co-production hid something unusual, a plot where Americans and Soviets worked together, united against a mysterious third enemy. In 1966, at the height of Cold War suspicion, such a premise was daring, even subversive. Directed by Marcello Ciorciolini, the film follows an international conspiracy surrounding a stolen black box, a device capable of destabilizing global security. Its cast wasn't star-studded, yet its premise carried weight. Could East and West cooperate in the name of survival? The film asked this question years before détente softened global hostilities. Despite this provocative setup, Black Box Affair was quickly forgotten. Distribution was uneven. In some countries, it was barely screened. Part of the problem was timing. Spy audiences craved glamorous heroes, not moral dilemmas. Bond had cocktails, gadgets, and quips. Black Box Affair had uncomfortable alliances and moral gray zones. The public wasn't ready. Behind the scenes, tensions simmered. Financing was scarce, and producers cut corners, resulting in uneven cinematography and abrupt edits. Yet its ideological boldness makes it a fascinating relic. Watching it now feels like uncovering a time capsule, one that dared to dream of unity when division was the law of the land. In its forgotten status lies its power. Black Box Affair whispers to us that even at the Cold War's darkest hour, some filmmakers dared to imagine peace. 3. Agent 505, Death Trap in Beirut, 1966. When Jess Franco's Agent 505, Todes Fala Beirut arrived in theaters, it was packaged as another glossy spy romp filled with car chases, gunfights, and glamorous women. But beneath its colorful facade was an anxious reflection of the Middle East's rising volatility during the 1960s. The story follows Agent Richard Blake, tasked with unraveling a plot involving chemical weapons hidden in Beirut. Franco, known for his eccentric, uneven career, crafted a film equal parts espionage and pulp melodrama. Unlike the polished English Bond films, Agent 505 leaned into excess. Over-the-top villains, gaudy nightclub scenes, and chase sequences that felt more chaotic than choreographed. Its reception was mixed. Some audiences thrilled to its exotic locations and relentless pace. Others found it messy, bordering on camp. Italian critics were especially harsh, accusing it of exploiting Beirut's exoticism without respecting its culture. Yet this messiness is precisely what gives it a strange vitality. Unlike the cool perfection of Bond, Agent 505 feels raw, unpredictable, alive. Behind the curtain, production was turbulent. Franco clashed with German and Italian financiers over budgets, and Beirut's real political instability made shooting dangerous. Crew members recalled evacuating locations mid-scene due to sudden protests. The risk seeped into the celluloid, leaving the film with a jittery urgency that no studio polish could replicate. Though mostly forgotten today, Agent 505. Death Trap in Beirut stands as a fever dream of Cold War anxiety, a film that dressed its fears in glamorous costumes but couldn't hide the tremor beneath. It is imperfect, chaotic, and perhaps because of that, unforgettable once rediscovered. 4. Agent 3. S3. Passport to Hell, 1965. When Agent 3 S3. Passport to Hell hit screens, it carried a promise. Italy could produce a secret agent as daring, as stylish, and as bankable as James Bond. George Artisan starred as Agent 3S3, known for his striking looks and athletic physique. Unlike the gadget-heavy Bond, Artisan's spy was more grounded, relying on brute force, quick wit, and raw instinct. The film follows 3S3 as he races across Europe to dismantle a criminal network trafficking in stolen defense secrets. Its narrative is brisk, almost breathless, filled with shootouts, nightclub seductions, and double agents who switch loyalties faster than cards on a poker table. For 1965 audiences, it was escapist cinema that still reflected the gnawing anxiety of espionage wars raging beneath the surface of everyday life. Behind the scenes, director Sergio Sollima, later famous for spaghetti westerns, infused the film with pace and energy, though he often sparred with producers about budgets and locations. Rumor has it that half the film was shot in rushed takes due to pressure from financiers eager to release it before the Bond craze peaked. Critics in Italy noted the hurried editing, but audiences didn't seem to care. They wanted adventure, and Sollima delivered. Despite a decent box office run, the film was quickly overshadowed by its British rival franchises. Over time, its reels gathered dust in archives, dismissed as a derivative Eurospy curio. Yet rewatching it now reveals flashes of originality, a grittier, leaner alternative to Bond's luxury. Artisan's Agent 3S3 was less about tuxedos and martinis, more about grit, determination, and shadows. Forgotten by many, Passport to Hell remains a relic of an industry fighting to prove it could rival Hollywood on its own terms. And in that fight, it found its own jagged identity. 5 UMMM 83 1966. At first, MMM-83 seemed destined for international success. The title itself, standing for Missione Mortale Molo 83, suggested high-stakes adventure, espionage, and intrigue. Directed by Sergio Bergonzelli, the film starred Fred Bear as a government agent sent to dismantle an international drug and espionage ring. With its sleek pacing and exotic backdrops, it had all the ingredients of a Eurospy classic. But audiences never fully embraced it. One reason was timing. By 1966, spy fatigue had set in. Dozens of Bond imitations crowded theaters, leaving viewers overwhelmed. MMM-83 simply struggled to stand out. Another reason was style. Bergonzelli, more comfortable with pulp melodramas, gave the film an uneven tone, swinging between tense espionage and flamboyant nightclub theatrics. Behind the camera, production was equally uneven. Financing came from a patchwork of Italian, Spanish, and German investors, each demanding creative input. This led to bizarre compromises, like overwrought comic relief sequences spliced between gritty action scenes. Cast members recalled scenes being rewritten on the spot, sometimes in languages half the crew didn't understand. The result? A film that felt stitched together, not sculpted. Yet beneath its flaws lies a curious charm. Beer played the role with earnest conviction, and the cinematography, shot across Rome and coastal Spain, captured a seductive Cold War atmosphere. Critics who revisited it decades later argued that, while imperfect, it offered a rare glimpse into Europe's struggle to carve its own spy mythology independent of Bond. Today, MMM-83 is nearly forgotten, rarely screened outside cult retrospectives. But for those who seek it out, it feels like a rough diamond buried in the archives, a flawed yet fascinating experiment from an era of cinematic espionage fever. 6. Agent X-77 Orders to Kill, 1966. Among Italy's forgotten spy thrillers, Agent X-77 Orders to Kill holds a strange place. Starring Gerard Beret, it was designed to be Italy's answer to Sean Connery's Bond, stylish, unflappable, and deadly. Yet instead of celebrating excess, the film took a darker route. It centered on political assassinations, double agents, and betrayals that mirrored the very real paranoia of the Cold War. The story follows Agent X-77 as he uncovers a conspiracy to eliminate world leaders using high-tech assassination methods. While Bond films dazzled with gadgets, Agent X-77 stripped espionage down to its brutal essentials: knives in alleyways, poisonings in hotel rooms, and whispered betrayals in smoke-filled bars. For 1966, it was shockingly blunt, almost too real for audiences expecting escapism. The production itself was marked by tension. French and Italian producers clashed over direction. Some wanted glossy fantasy. Others demanded gritty realism. Director Maurice Cloche walked a tightrope, resulting in a film that sometimes felt tonally uneven but undeniably gripping. Gerard Beret was praised for his stoic performance, though some critics found him too wooden compared to Connery's charisma. Audiences gave it a lukewarm reception. It lacked the glamour viewers craved, and without that escapist sheen, it was quietly shelved as another failed Bond imitation. But history reveals it was braver than that. While Bond glamorized espionage, Agent X-77 exposed its shadows. It dared to strip away fantasy and leave audiences with something colder, something uncomfortably real. Today, the film is barely remembered, yet its realism feels prophetic. Decades later, spy thrillers would return to grit and shadows, territory this forgotten Italian relic had already explored. 7. Agent 3S3 Massacre in the Sun, 1966. If Passport to Hell was Italy's bold debut into the Eurospy craze, its sequel Massacre in the Sun aimed to prove the character of Agent 3S3 had staying power. Once again, George Artisan returned, carrying both charm and brute strength in a role that demanded constant action. But while audiences expected glamour and spectacle, what they got was a film that flirted with darkness. The plot sends Agent 3S3 to the Mediterranean coast, where a shadowy syndicate seeks to destabilize European governments using smuggling routes disguised as tourist operations. On the surface, it's pure pulp: speedboats slicing through turquoise seas, villains in white suits, and femme fatales with suspiciously quick tempers. Yet underneath, the story carried real resonance. In the mid-1960s, smuggling and espionage in Southern Europe weren't just fiction. They reflected genuine fears about porous borders and infiltration. Behind the scenes, director Sergio Sollima wrestled with escalating costs. Reports from crew members tell of night shoots cut short because financiers refused to pay overtime, forcing action sequences to be stitched together from scraps of footage. Artisan, determined to keep his spy viable, reportedly performed dangerous stunts himself. One involving a speedboat chase left him bruised and nearly unconscious. The result was a film with thrilling moments but uneven polish. Critics dismissed it as rushed, yet audiences in Italy were captivated for a season. Still, by the late 1960s, it had vanished from international circulation, eclipsed by Hollywood's dominance. Watching it today feels like holding a sun-bleached postcard from a forgotten war, flashy, flawed, but laced with the anxious heartbeat of the Cold War Mediterranean. 8. Assassination, 1967. Assassination, directed by Emilio Miraglia, arrived in theaters with an irresistible promise, an espionage thriller that blurred the line between political conspiracy and psychological paranoia. Starring Henry Silva, it followed a professional killer drawn into a tangled web of shifting allegiances. This wasn't just another Eurospy adventure, it was a cynical meditation on betrayal at the highest levels of power. Unlike the flamboyant 007 films, Assassination carried a mood closer to John le Carré than Ian Fleming. It was stripped of glossy gadgets and indulgent fantasy. Instead, it unfolded in shadowed alleys, dim hotel rooms, and tense diplomatic offices, where every handshake could be fatal. Italian audiences expecting Bond-like thrills were divided. Some admired its grit, others called it too bleak. Behind the camera, Miraglia, who would later make Gothic giallo films, was still honing his style. He crafted sharp compositions, focusing on Silva's haunted expressions. Production, however, was rocky. Financing came late, forcing the crew to recycle sets and film in Rome while pretending it was London or Berlin. Yet these constraints gave the movie a claustrophobic intensity that suited its themes of entrapment. Upon release, critics called it unsettling. It lacked commercial appeal, but its cynical atmosphere left an impression on genre enthusiasts. Over time, though, it fell into obscurity, overshadowed by the flashier, more accessible spy adventures of the era. Today, Assassination feels prophetic. Its suspicion of power, its distrust of alliances, and its willingness to portray espionage as soulless rather than glamorous make it a relic that speaks louder now than it did in 1967. It may be forgotten, but its shadows linger. 9. Wolves Hunt at Night, 1952. Long before the Bond craze, Italian cinema dipped its toes into Cold War paranoia with Wolves Hunt at Night. Directed by Bernard Bourdry and co-produced with France, it followed a world-weary spy entangled in smuggling and espionage networks along the Adriatic coast. For audiences in the early 1950s, still reeling from World War II, it felt like a dark warning. Peace was fragile, and war's shadows had not lifted. Unlike later Eurospy films, Wolves Hunt at Night lacked glamorous sheen. It was grim, atmospheric, and noir-inflected, closer to neorealism than pulp fantasy. Its protagonist was not a tuxedoed hero, but a tired operative who doubted his mission as much as his master's. This honesty made it powerful, but also difficult to market in an era when audiences craved optimism. Behind the scenes, financing was thin. The production reused sets and leaned heavily on night shooting to hide budgetary shortcomings. Actors recalled improvising entire scenes due to missing props or faulty cameras. Yet the film's roughness only added to its noir character, giving it an authenticity later spy films often lacked. It failed at the box office, forgotten almost immediately. Yet looking back, Wolves Hunt at Night deserves recognition as a bridge, a film that carried Italian cinema from the rubble of war into the murky intrigues of the Cold War. Watching it now feels like standing at the very edge of an era before espionage turned glossy. Its wolves still prowl, and their growls echo faintly through history. 10. Black Box Affair, 1966. When Black Box Affair premiered, it baffled audiences. Here was a spy thriller that refused to play by the Cold War's simple rules. Instead of pitting East against West, it forced American and Soviet operatives into an uneasy alliance against a mysterious third force. In 1966, that was a bold and unsettling statement. Directed by Marcello Ciorciolini, the Italian-Spanish production followed a plot involving a stolen black box, a device containing information so sensitive it could destabilize world security. The idea of sworn enemies uniting under threat was far from escapist. It was a reflection of the growing anxiety that nuclear destruction might force collaboration between superpowers. The film's tone was darker than most Eurospy outings, with paranoia dripping from every frame. But this ambition came at a price. Funding was erratic, and producers reportedly argued daily over whether the movie should lean toward high-gloss entertainment or gritty allegory. Giorgiolini tried to balance both, creating a film that felt at once pulpy and politically charged. Critics at the time didn't know what to make of it. Some dismissed it as incoherent, while others called it dangerously subversive. Distribution was another hurdle. In several European countries, theaters declined to screen it, fearing controversy. Without strong promotion, the film all but disappeared, remembered only by genre loyalists. Today, however, its ideological gamble feels strangely prescient, anticipating détente and later films that questioned the very structure of Cold War divisions. Black Box Affair is a cinematic. Ghost, forgotten, uneven, but daring enough to whisper truths few were willing to say aloud in 1966. 11. Uomini Ombra, Men in the Shadows, 1960s. Almost nothing remains of Uomini Ombra, a little-known Italian spy film from the 1960s, except for scattered references in genre catalogs. Its obscurity has elevated it to near-mythic status among Eurospy enthusiasts. What we do know suggests it was a moody thriller about operatives caught between loyalty and survival, a story of betrayal echoing the shadow wars of the time. The very title, Men in the Shadows, evokes the facelessness of espionage. Unlike Bond or 007, these were not glamorous agents. They were nameless cogs, swallowed by the machinery of intelligence. Reports indicate that the film used stark cinematography, playing with silhouettes and heavy contrast to emphasize anonymity. Viewers would see shadows of men making deals in alleys, but rarely their full faces. Why did it vanish? Several theories exist. Some historians believe it was lost in the shuffle of Italy's frantic low-budget productions, screened briefly before being shelved. Others suggest it may have faced censorship, its cynical take on power deemed too politically dangerous. There are even whispers that only fragments survive in private collections, the rest consumed by time. In many ways, its absence tells its story. Uomini Ombra reminds us that not every Cold War spy film survived to shape the genre. Some lived briefly, flickered in smoky theaters, and then dissolved into memory. To rediscover it now, even in scraps, would be to resurrect a ghost from the archives of Cold War paranoia. 12. Document Z3, 1942. Although released before the Cold War technically began, Document Z3 set the stage for Italy's later espionage thrillers. Directed by Alfredo Guarini, it told the story of spies battling for secret plans during World War II. Audiences in fascist Italy watched it as a straightforward wartime thriller, but seen through hindsight, its DNA is unmistakably Cold War. The film introduced tropes that would echo throughout Italian spy cinema: coded documents, mysterious femmes fatales, and double agents whose allegiances turned on a dime. Unlike the glamorous thrillers of the 1960s, however, Document Z3 carried the heavy atmosphere of war propaganda. Its heroes fought not for personal glory, but for national survival. Production was turbulent. Italy in 1942 was under bombardment, resources were scarce, and sets were often improvised. Actors recalled filming under blackout conditions, with power cuts interrupting key scenes. Despite these difficulties, Guarini managed to create tension through stark lighting and shadow play, foreshadowing the noir-tinged aesthetics that would dominate post-war spy films. After the war, Document Z3 was quickly forgotten. Its wartime politics made it uncomfortable for post-fascist Italy, and newer films swept in to capture the Cold War zeitgeist. Yet its influence lingered in subtle ways. When Eurospy films flourished 2 decades later, they borrowed from the visual and thematic blueprint Guarini helped sketch. Forgotten as propaganda, remembered as proto-spy cinema, Document Z3 is a reminder that every genre has hidden ancestors, buried in reels of history. 13. Battles in the Shadow, 1938. Though released before the Cold War, Augusto Giannina's Battles in the Shadow deserves its place here. This rare Italian spy thriller foreshadowed the paranoia and duplicity that would define later Cold War cinema. Set against the tense backdrop of international espionage, it tells the story of agents entangled in webs of deceit, where no allegiance is permanent. Audiences in 1938 were unsettled by its themes. Italy was on the brink of war, and the idea of unseen shadow battles between spies struck too close to home. The film's stark black-and-white cinematography emphasized secrecy, with silhouettes and half-lit corridors creating an aura of menace. While it was intended partly as nationalist propaganda, it inadvertently captured the mood of an entire generation sliding into global conflict. Behind the scenes, production was rushed under government pressure, with censors demanding adjustments to ensure the story aligned with official ideology. Actors recalled performing dialogue rewritten at the last minute to remove anything too ambiguous. Yet those very restrictions forced the filmmakers to rely on suggestion and shadow, which gave the movie its eerie power. Forgotten after the war and overshadowed by Italy's neorealism boom, Battles in the Shadow now survives mostly in archives. For modern viewers, it plays less like propaganda and more like an accidental prophecy of the Cold War, spies lurking unseen, wars fought in silence. 14° Agente X-17, Operazione Oceano, 1906. By the mid-1960s, Italian filmmakers were producing spy films at a furious pace, desperate to ride the Eurospy wave. Agente X-17, Operazione Oceano, directed by Tanio Boccia, was one such effort, but it distinguished itself with its nautical theme. Instead of casinos and penthouses, much of the action took place on ships, submarines, and remote coastal bases. The story followed Agent George Collins, played by Lang Jeffries, who was tasked with foiling a sinister plot involving a secret weapon capable of contaminating the world's oceans. For audiences at the height of Cold War nuclear fear, the idea of oceans being turned into weapons resonated deeply. It was both fantastical and terrifying. Behind the curtain, however, the production was plagued by limited resources. Boccia, nicknamed the Italian Ed Wood, was notorious for shooting quickly and cheaply. Some scenes were filmed in swimming pools, mocked up as open seas. Others reused footage from documentaries. Actors joked about the absurdity of pretending to be in international waters while surrounded by Rome's concrete walls. Despite these limitations, the film found charm in its earnestness. Jeffries played Collins with straightforward grit, and the underwater sequences, though crude, gave the film a unique visual identity. While critics dismissed it as low-rent pulp, it struck a chord with audiences who wanted escapism with a darker edge. Today, Operazione Oceano is rarely remembered, yet its environmental doomsday premise feels oddly modern. It warned that human ambition could weaponize even the oceans, a theme as chilling now as it was in 1965. 15. Agent 077, From the Orient with Fury, 1965. Among Italy's many Eurospy experiments, From the Orient with Fury is one of the most polished yet strangely forgotten. Once again starring Ken Clark as Agent 077, it delivered everything audiences expected: international intrigue, a suave hero, beautiful women, and a plot centered around stolen nuclear secrets. Yet for all its energy, it never escaped Bond's overwhelming shadow. The film's reputation was solid at release. Critics noted its stylish sets and lively pacing, with Clark leaning fully into the role of Italy's American-born Bond surrogate. The story whisked viewers through Madrid, Paris, and exotic Eastern locales, giving a cosmopolitan feel that rivaled bigger-budget productions. Its villain, a power-hungry industrialist, was chilling, reflecting real anxieties about corporations meddling in global politics. Yet despite all these strengths, From the Orient with Fury disappeared quickly from international circulation. Distribution deals fell apart, especially in English-speaking countries where audiences were saturated with official Bond films. In Italy, it enjoyed modest success, but producers hoping for a global franchise were left disappointed. Behind the scenes, tensions simmered. Clarke, by then a veteran of Eurospy roles, was reportedly frustrated at constantly being cast as a Bond imitation rather than given a role with deeper dimension. Director Sergio Grieco clashed with financiers over creative direction, with arguments delaying the film's release. Watching it today, one sees a film that could have been Italy's definitive spy export. Sleek, confident, and tightly paced, it deserved more recognition. Instead, it remains an artifact, a forgotten gem of an era when Italy believed it could play the espionage game just as well as Britain. From smoky nightclubs to dangerous coastlines, these forgotten Italian spy thrillers captured the Cold War's paranoia in their own fractured way. Some were messy, others prophetic, all now buried by history. Which one deserves rediscovery? Comment your pick below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more hidden cinematic treasures.